Let me begin by explaining the nature and scope of the Trump-era tariff in Southeast Asia. Under President Trump, America's first doctrine, the United States adopted protectionist trade policies to support domestic industries. As a result, Southeast Asia, particularly countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, was pulled into the shifting trade dynamic. These countries become more involved due to increased US scrutiny and the redirection of global supply chain away from China. One clear example of this involvement happened in 2019 when the US imposed over 400% duties on Vietnamese steel. This was due to accusation that Chinese companies were using Vietnam as a transit point to evade existing tariff. Now, let's take a look at the tariff rate sector involved and the timeline of implementation. The most direct and aggressive action came on 2 April 2025 with the introduction of what was called the Liberation Day tariff. This tariff affected 5 Southeast Asian countries with the following rates. Vietnam faced a 46% tariff, Thailand 37%, Indonesia 32%, Malaysia 24%, and the Philippines 18%. The hardest hit sector included electronics, textile, and automotive part industries that a major contributor to the region's export. It's also important to note that even before 2025, the region was indirectly impacted by US tariff on China between 2018 and 2019, which pushed companies to shift production into Southeast Asia. Finally, what were the reasons behind these policies? The US aimed to reduce its reliance on China and bring manufacturing jobs back home. Another major goal was to fix trade imbalance and respond to what it saw as unfair practices, such as intellectual property theft and currency manipulation. Countries with trade surplus against the US, like those in Southeast Asia, were targeted in order to pressure them into more favorable bilateral trade agreement. Lastly, Trump's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership signaled a shift toward one-on-one negotiation rather than multilateral deals.
Impact on importing industries. Rising input costs. Manufacturers like Thailand's automotive face higher costs due to reliance on expensive Chinese components. Currency fluctuation weakening local currencies like Indonesian rupiah, Philippine peso made import even pricier, contributing to trade deficit. Adaptation. Regional effort to diversify suppliers and attract foreign investment to reduce reliance on single sources. Impact on exporting industries. Beneficiaries of trade diversion. Vietnam saw significant export growth to the US, especially in electronic, textile, and furniture. Malaysia increased semiconductor export, strengthening its role in global tech supply chains. Thailand and Indonesia boosted automotive and electrical equipment export respectively. Cambodia gained market share in apparel. Emerging bottlenecks. Infrastructure strain like port delay in Thailand, rising labour costs like wage inflation in Vietnam industrial zone, increased scrutiny from US custom, longer clearance delay, anti-dumping investigation. Trade volume and balance shift. Increased export to the US. Southeast Asian countries became alternative suppliers for US buyers, leading to higher export volume. Example, Vietnam export to US increased by almost 30% in some sectors. Trade surpluses with US. Many SEA nations, notably Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, saw their trade surpluses with the US grow significantly. Intra-Asian trade. Increased import of Chinese intermediate goods by sea for assembly and export to the US, impacting regional trade dynamics. Mixed balances with China while US surpluses increase. Some countries face weakened trade balances with China due to lower demand for raw material and continued reliance on Chinese input. Regional supply chain adjustment. Diversification. Multinational firms actively pursued China Plus One strategy, shifting production to sea. Increased FDI. Southeast Asia experienced record foreign direct investment inflows as companies like Apple and Samsung move operation. Challenges to relocation. Constraints like a shortage of skilled labour and underdeveloped infrastructure limited the scale of full relocation. Regional integration. Increased importance of regional trade agreement like RCEP and CPTPP to create tariff efficient supply chain pathway within the bloc. Let's go.
In this part of the presentation, I'll be explaining how 5 Southeast Asian countries responded to the reciprocal tariffs imposed by the United States during the Trump administration. While countries like China and the European Union reacted strongly through legal means or retaliation tariffs, Southeast Asia took a very different approach. None of the 5 countries chose to respond with direct retaliation. Instead, they adopted a calm, diplomatic strategy focused on preserving good trade relations, avoiding escalation, and protecting their economies in the long run. Let's begin with Vietnam, the country that faced the highest tariffs up to 46%, especially on exports like steel, furniture, and textiles. Vietnam did not strike back. Instead, its Ministry of Industry and Trade issued an official diplomatic note to the US Trade Representative requesting a temporary delay in the implementation of the tariffs. Vietnam also proposed bilateral negotiations to resolve the issue peacefully. The country made it clear that its priority was to protect its trade reputation and sustain its export growth through cooperation rather than confrontation. Next, we have Malaysia, which was affected by tariffs on electronic and palm oil about 24%. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Malaysia remained diplomatic. Anwar called for a special parliamentary session to explain the government's position transparently to the public. He emphasized that Malaysia would not respond with counter-tariffs. Instead, the country would focus on negotiations based on mutual respect and continue to promote regional cooperation within Asia. Moving on to Thailand, which faced tariffs of 36% on key exports, the Thai Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin issued an official statement reaffirming the country's commitment to maintaining strong ties with the United States. He instructed government ministries to study the impact of the tariffs and to explore trade balancing strategies. As a sign of goodwill, Thailand considered increasing its import of American goods and adjusting relevant domestic policies, all while maintaining diplomatic dialogue with the US. As for Indonesia, which was affected by 32% tariffs on palm oil and textiles, the government proposed a win-win solution. President Joko Widodo's administration suggested that Indonesia could allow greater access for US agricultural exports into its market. In exchange, the US would reduce tariffs on Indonesian products. Indonesia remained confident that diplomatic negotiation, not retaliation, would lead to an outcome that benefits both sides. And lastly, the Philippines experienced a 17% increase in tariffs, particularly affecting electronics and processed food exports. The Philippine government, through its Department of Trade and Industry, announced its intention to formally request lower US tariffs during an upcoming bilateral meeting. Rather than reacting aggressively, the Philippines emphasized the importance of fair and open market access and chose to pursue discussion with the US in a respectful and constructive manner. In conclusion, all 5 Southeast Asian countries, which is Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines, choose diplomacy over retaliation. None of them filed formal complaints through the World Trade Organization, and none imposed counter-tariffs. Instead, their focus was on maintaining peaceful trade ties, conducting bilateral negotiations, and preserving regional economic stability. This unified and peaceful response helped avoid trade conflict, preserve investor confidence, and solidify Asia's reputation as a reliable and stable economic partner on the global stage.
Next, I'm going to talk about how the United States economy was affected by tariff on goods imported from Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. These countries send a lot of product to the US like electronic, clothes, machine part, and even food. When the US government added tariff or extra tax on this product, it caused many changes in their price, job, and how business work. Okay, first, let's talk about the effect on consumer, the people who buy things. Because of the tariff, the price of many everyday goods went up. This includes things like phone, computer, clothes, shoes, and seafood. All these items become more expensive to buy. This made life harder to many American families because their money could not buy as much as before. On top of that, some products were no longer sold in store because they became too costly to import. So people had fewer choice and they might have started buying less overall. When people spend less, the economy can slow down. Now let's talk about inflation. Tariff added to the rising cost of goods in the US economy. Since importing things become more expensive, business pass those costs to customer by raising their price. That made it expensive to buy everyday item. Also, when company had to find new, more costly supplier, they added even more pressure on price. So, tariff did not just affect business; they also made life more expensive for ordinary people. This kind of inflation can hurt both consumer and companies. Okay, next, let's move to the business. Some American companies benefit from the tariff, especially those that compete with products from Southeast Asian. For example, companies that make steel or solar panel in the US. But for many other business, the tariff were a big problem. A lot of US factories depend on cheaper part and raw material from Southeast Asian to make their product. When those items become more expensive, it costs more to build things. So the final product made in American also become more expensive and harder to sell. Some companies even had to change their supply chains, find new supplier or move factory to other countries, which cost a lot of money and time. Last is the impact on job in America. One of the goal of tariff was to protect American job. Some job is a protected industry, may have been safe or create, but it was not all good news. In many other areas, company has to spend more or sell less, so they had to cut job. For example, in the solar industry, the tariff made solar panel more expensive to build, so company could not grow as much or hire more people, which also reduced job opportunities here. So overall, the effect on job were mixed. Some were gained, but others were lost. So in conclusion, while tariffs were meant to help protect American industry, they also caused higher price, fewer product choice, job change, and overall inflation. The full impact is complicated. Some people gain, but many others had to deal with extra costs and challenge.
Next, border economic and strategic effect. Tariff tension has led to key long-term consequences in Southeast Asia, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, including supply chain realignment, regional trade agreement, and shift in geopolitical alliance. For Malaysia, the long-term effect is supply chain realignment. Many companies move production out of China to avoid high tariff, and Malaysia became a preferred destination due to its strong electronic sector and skilled workforce, resulting in a rise in foreign investment. In Indonesia, the long-term effect lies in regional trade integration. The country centered its involvement in trade agreements like RCEP, which is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, to reduce dependence on US, expand export within Asia, and attract more investors. Next, in Philippines, supply chain realignment has made the country a rising hub for electronic, garment, and food boasting trade opportunities but requiring improvement in infrastructure and workforce skill. In Vietnam, geopolitical shifts are becoming more evident as US tariffs push it closer to China, making it harder to balance ties with both power and increasing pressure to stay neutral. For Thailand, long-term tariff and weaker US ties have drawn it towards China, reducing strategic flexibility and increasing economic dependence on Beijing.